Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me thank you all for your service, and through you, the people who serve underneath you and make very significant sacrifices, and particularly General Petraeus. I am one of those who understand that never have so few been asked to bear so much of the sacrifice. And it's because of that that I ask the questions that I do. And I want to start with you, General. Let me get this straight. From everybody's testimony here, and when we had the Secretary of State and Defense, the essence of what I get is that we have defined our national security in the context of Afghanistan as having stability and security in Afghanistan in our own national interest. Is that correct?
Well, our overriding objective, of course, is to ensure that al-Qaeda and other transnational extremists don't reestablish a sanctuary in Afghanistan such as
and as
what
such,
they had
we want
prior
to have
9/11.
we want to have safety and security there so that they don't have the ability to.
And and the way to ensure that overriding interest is to have a country that is not a failed state and allows that to happen.
So if that is the case, and if we accept that as our national security interests, then what follows is that while we are aspirational as to whether President Karzai will meet the standards of eliminating the corruption and what goes on right now in Afghanistan, whether or not he succeeds in our aspirations, and I understand, Ambassador Eikenberry, that you may have written sections of what we now praise as his commitment, we will still be in the same national security paradigm. If he fails to have the good governance we want, if he fails to support the creation of the level of Afghan troops and police and the quality of them to carry out missions, we will still be in the position that it will be our national security interest to have security and stability in Afghanistan because we don't want it to be a safe haven for al-Qaeda. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it is.
So therefore, the problem seems to me that part of the question here is that dictates that we have a long-term obligation to Afghanistan because we hope that Karzai will do everything that's right. But, again, and we may prod and poke and, maybe try to direct money in different ways, but at the end of the day, this depends upon an Afghan government that can ultimately sustain itself. And my view of that, therefore, is skepticism on that goal, based on what I've seen. So let me ask you then, do we agree with the comments made by President Karzai that it may be as much as 5 years before his troops can take on insurgents and 2024 before the Afghans will be able to pay for their own security? Is his statement a fair one?
Well, Senator, I think, again, it's not a light switch that takes place in a situation like this.
But is that a reasonable time frame?
I can't talk about the long-term time frame. Again, that depends on how rapidly, obviously, they can generate much greater revenue, and that depends to a degree on security and infrastructure and so forth. But certainly it is going to be years before they can handle the bulk of the security tasks and allow the bulk of our troopers to redeploy. What our goal is, of course, is to get that process going, to create the conditions where they can handle the security situation because of the capability they have and because of the degradation of the Taliban in those particular areas.
Well, if I factor out your previous answer to assuming that the Afghans got to certain levels of both police and troop strength and what it would cost, and if it's true that his statement that it'd be 2024 before they'd be able to handle the bill on themselves, we're talking about $150 billion just on the security side before we get to the development side. So, at some point we need to get the price tag here to be part of the equation so we understand what we're spending in our security context. And that brings me to the questions of, Secretary Lew, I think we've spent $13 billion in development assistance to date in Afghanistan. Is that correct?
Roughly correct.
Roughly, okay. But all the testimony I hear leads me to believe that after $13 billion, we are basically starting from scratch as it relates to development efforts, which is pretty alarming. So, you know, I want to get a sense of how we are going to, you know, go from right now a clearly overwhelmingly military context to all of the statements that we need a government that can sustain itself and operate, and then do that $13 billion later without virtually any success, and think about you're going to triple, you say, your civilian corps, which to 900 some odd, which means we only have 300 some odd. And I'm looking at all of this in the time frame and the money that has been spent, and we haven't quantified what we're going to be looking on the civilian side. And, you know, I get rather anxious.
Well, Senator, first, I think it's not correct to say that there's nothing to show for the past development program.
Tell me what we show
I
for
think
the $13 billion.
that before the development assistance that you're describing, there was virtually no access to health care in Afghanistan. There's very substantial access to health care in Afghanistan in the 80% range. There were virtually no girls enrolled in schools. There are now a lot of girls enrolled in schools and more every day, every week, every month. I think that it's fair to say that we have an awful lot of work ahead of us, that the institution building, particularly at the governmental level and outside of Kabul at the subnational level, is a substantial challenge. I don't think it's quite the same as starting from scratch. I think if you look at the government that President Karzai has, with all the problems that we spend a lot of time discussing, there are a lot of ministries and ministers who have been doing quite a good job. If you look at their agriculture program and where we're coming in to support their agriculture program, there's an agriculture minister who has a 5-year plan that's a good plan. He's relying on the international community, and in our case, USAID and USDA, to be supporting their plan. It's not to say that it's easy, but the work is building on a foundation that is an Afghan-driven agriculture plan. That's true in other ministries as well. It's not true in every ministry. In terms of the level of U.S. civilian presence, when we started at the beginning of the year, there were roughly 320 civilians on the ground. By the end of January, we're going to be close to 1,000. That's a very big difference in terms of the amount of programming that we have going on, not just in Kabul, but in all of the provincial areas, the district areas, where we'll be teaming up on a day-to-day basis. And I think that you're going to see very substantial change in the progress made, and it's all tightly coordinated in a civilian-military plan where the civilians are going in right when the military is created the space for them to work.